Colleagues, it's the scheduled time and we have already formed a quorum. Let's call the meeting to order. I believe all of you have received the agenda for today. Item 1, election of deputy chairman. Is there any nomination from members? Yes, Ms. Sit Ho. Kenneth Chan. All right, Mr. Chan, do you accept the nomination? Yes, I do. Any seconder? Mr. Gary Fan seconds. Any other nominations? Any other nominations? If none, then I'll declare Dr. Kenneth Chan elected deputy chairman ipso facto. All right, Dr. Chan, would you like to stay in your seat or come over to the stage? No. Okay, item 2, confirmation of minutes. The first meeting was held on the 9th of October and the minutes have been circulated to members. As of now, we have not received any proposals for amendments. If there is no objection, then can I propose that we confirm the minutes? All right, no objection. Minutes confirmed. Item 3, information papers issued since the meeting held on the 23rd of July 2014. Altogether, there are 4, and they've been set out in the agenda, so I don't propose to read them out one by one. Okay, so item 4. Items for discussion at the next meeting. Please refer to the list of follow-up actions and list of outstanding items for discussion. And the list sets out the items for discussion in the coming year. And the administration has proposed 2 items. One is PWP item number 5054DP, further enhancing the quality of coastal waters of Victoria Harbour. Next, emergency sewage discharge incident at Pillar Point Sewage Treatment Works. In fact, on the 8th of September, we conducted a site visit at the plant, and the administration has given us an information paper on that, so we can discuss that item next time. So, any comments on the 2 items to be discussed? No? Yes, Ms. Sito. Well, for the list of outstanding items for discussion, Chairman, can I suggest that with regard to Western Waters, with the 3rd runway development, and also we have the southwestern marine parks in Lantau being proposed. I understand that some green groups suggest that we should first designate the marine park before we go for the 3rd runway. So can you invite the administration to come over to discuss that with us? All right, I'll jot that down. Any other suggestions? If not, then item 5, the 2 discussion items. The first one, waste disposal, designated waste disposal facility amendment regulation 2013, and the waste disposal refuse transfer station amendment regulation 2013 commencement notice. All right, let's invite the Bureau Director to join us. We have Mr. Wong Kam Singh and Mr. Howard Chen, Deputy Director, and Ms. Dr. Ellen Chen, Assistant Director, and Mr. Chen Chi Kwong, Principal Environmental Protection Officer from the EPD. Well, this is a legislative proposal to bring into effect the provisions for enhancing the performance of refuse collection vehicles and designation of RTS and so on. So I'll ask them to brief us first before the floor is open to members' questions and answers. Bureau Director, good afternoon, Chairman and members. This paper seeks members' approval on the measures to open up the STTS for private waste collectors, and also commencement of the reduction of fee for use of RTS and so on. Well, about a year ago, with regard to the diversion plan for SENT landfill, we consulted the panel. We proposed a series of measures, including introducing or increasing the capacity for RTS, and also the opening up of the Sha Tin transfer station for private vehicle of waste collectors, and also we propose to reduce the fee for use of refuse transfer stations, and also the commencement to commence the requirement of new equipment standards on refuse collection vehicles to ensure that the diverted waste will be properly dealt with, and also to minimize the impact on traffic. And after the consultation, we started with the preparation, and the measures involved some legislative amendments. And last year, we followed the negative vetting process, and we tabled that before this council. And through the subcommittee set up by the House, it was supported, and the amendment items also came into effect, or was approved on the 22nd of January this year. There are a number of administrative measures. We subsidized the conversion of some RCVs, and also we rerouted the FEHD's collection service, and also we conducted some fitting out works for STTS, and satisfactory progress has been made in those areas. And we have also maintained a very close dialogue with the stakeholders, and meetings at the working level have also been held to ensure that things will go smoothly. And we are now ready for the introduction of amendment legislation, including the opening up of STTS for private waste collectors, and also lowering the fee for RTS, and also commence the requirement of new equipment standards on RCVs. And for the first two, we would like them to come into effect on the 1st of March next year, and then for the third one, that will come into effect on the 1st of April next year. And through today's meeting, we'd like to listen to the feedback from members, and I would also be happy to brief you on the progress of the diversion measures. Alright, I'll open the floor now, and I would allow 4 minutes initially to members, and I think we have a good practice, so you stop upon the end of 4 minutes, and then if you need more time, I'll give you a second round. First, Elizabeth Quat, and then Frankie Yik. Elizabeth Quat, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask that, alright, there have been reports saying that the STTS will not be able to cope with the private waste collectors using the service there. So according to the administration's estimate with regard to the capacity of the STTS, will it be able to cope, and what will the impact be? And also for the RCVs, how many public or private RCVs have been retrofitted? And also I've heard some complaints from the residents. Yes, some of the RCVs have been retrofitted, but then it's still emitting a lot of odor. So it's not just about the hardware, it has to do with the software. So are you able to ensure that all RCVs will be fully enclosed so that they would not be leaking waste? And thirdly, the administration told us earlier on that for the Cheung Kwan O landfill, you'll be reducing the number of trips using one pole road. So how did you come up with the figure of the number of trips to be reduced? So can you tell us more? Yes, Mr. Howard Chan. Thank you, Dr. Quat, for your questions. I'll try to answer the question on the upgrading of RCVs, and then I'll ask my colleague to answer the rest. With regard to the retrofitting of the RCVs, I'd like to thank the trade for its support. As a result of that, the conversion program has meant that some 98% of the vehicles have been retrofitted already. And that figure means that 540 vehicles out of the 540 in use in Hong Kong, well, other than a small number which might have intended to join the other program, that is the replacement of pre-Euro 4 vehicles, or they are not carrying waste. For example, they might be collecting recyclables and transporting them to eco parks and so on. Majority of the RCVs have already applied for the one-off subsidy to retrofit them, and we also understand that with regard to the hardware retrofitting, you also need to ensure that the software can also tie in with the efforts. So we are now discussing with the trade. There would be some incentives so that there would be good practices that would be agreed with the trade. After the retrofitting of the vehicle, we also have to make sure that the software is in place. We are willing to work with the trade, and we encourage the trade that in terms of the operation, they would be doing a good job. All right, with the tailgate covers, you will also have to ensure that it's properly covered, and also after the retrofitting of such facilities, you also need to repair and maintain the vehicles properly. So we will be discussing this with the trade. For example, they also have the accreditation plan. So after they have put on the label, that would also act as an incentive. We would also say that in awarding such refuse collection contracts to the contractor, we would also be looking at such labels. Yes, Dr. Chen, with regard to the STTS, as we have explained, we would not be exceeding the design capacity of the transfer station itself. So all we are trying to do is that the FEHD, which has been using the STTS, will be rerouted to Takuling. That is the anti-northeast landfill, and then for the Shatin transfer station, is already used up to 90%. So it does have a small spare capacity. In other words, with that small spare capacity, together with the capacity vacated by the FEHD, it should be able to cope. All right, I'll give you more time later. Mr. Frankie Yik, and then Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, on behalf of the trade, I'd like to thank the department and the Bureau for their efforts in taking on board the views from the trade so that the diversion can be done properly. So I'd like to thank you for your efforts. I have two questions. The first one is for your confirmation, and the second one is a follow-up question. With regard to the private waste collectors, at present they've already signed some contracts with the FEHD for waste collection service. But then because of this change, it's not just for the short term. So during the remainder of the contractual period, they will have to go to STTS, and the route might be somewhat longer. For example, they will have to pay the tunnel tolls and so on. So the cost might have gone up. So would you be helping these collectors by taking it up with the FGHD so that there can be some fee adjustment? So I'd like you to confirm that. Second, well, at the previous meetings I've raised this, and the trade also made that point. That is for the RCVs. Yes, they have been retrofitted with a tailgate cover and also a wastewater sump tanks. But then they are concerned that, well, it's sometimes difficult to guess whether or not there would be a lot of water content in the waste, and sometimes it will spill. So with regard to the refuse collection points, would there be sewage discharge facilities so that if they think that the tank is already full, then they can also discharge it instead of having it spill over onto the roads? I think that's the common objective. But then, according to the administration, apparently the RCPs are not equipped with that facility. And even if you have to retrofit it, it would not be taking up too much of a space. So is it okay for you to do that at least at some points, even if it might not be feasible at all RCPs? Well, I can confirm that for the FEHD contractors, because they have to reroute their collection service because of the diversion, well, according to the contract, the FEHD has talked to some of the affected contractors to sort it out under the contract so that for the rerouting, that can be done smoothly. The second point that I'd like to clarify is that with regard to the RTS under the FEHD, they have already got sewage discharge facilities. But then for an ordinary RCPs, they might not be equipped with such facilities. So for the details, I'll defer to Dr. Chen. Yes, thank you for your question. Well, in fact, we have discussed that with the EPD colleagues and also the FEHD colleagues. In fact, in some cases, there might not be enough space for that, but then we'll take it up further with the FEHD.
Mr. Chairman, I understand that it may not be feasible for all the existing RCPs now, but I believe there is room for some, and as I said just now, these facilities should not take up too much space. If you need more information, I can give it to you. I hope you would actually look into it, because I don't want that after retrofitting RCVs with the wastewater sump tanks, the wastewater would just spill out and then all the effort would be wasted. Next, Dr. Low Wai Kwok, followed by Ms. Sit Ho. Dr. Low. Thank you, Chairman. Now, about this paper and the proposed amendments to the regulations, mostly for the purpose of enhancing the utilization of the RTS network and the performance of RCVs, I support them. And regarding the amendments proposed to regulations, these are just to implement the measures proposed by the government in relation to waste diversion, in particular in relation to the extension of these sand landfill. There are shortcomings, and these are follow-up measures, and these will be implemented following consultation on improving RCVs. Yes, they should be improved as far as hardware is concerned, and management should also be improved. Chairman, in the past I visited waste disposal facilities in other jurisdictions like Japan and Europe, and I think for domestic waste in Hong Kong, the water content is very high. For example, when I visited Japan and also Europe, when I visited the incinerators there, of course I don't have any statistics, but according to what I saw, I didn't see the abundant wastewater. So we should consider how we should deal with domestic waste first, whether we should dry up the waste first to reduce spillage or leakage. In South Korea, there are equipment installed at homes to dry up the domestic waste. And after going through the process, the waste can be used either as a fertilizer or for other purposes, and odor can be reduced, and the cost for further processing is also reduced, and this is done through a joint effort with the community. So I think the government should think out of the box and make more improvement. And on waste conveyance, apart from the nuisance caused by domestic waste and food waste, other forms of waste like paper and polystyrene foam would also cause a nuisance. As drivers, you may have seen such nuisance. Along the highway, you see waste paper and polystyrene foam, and there are numerous examples. The administration should really hold a meeting and see how enforcement can be improved. Secretary, thank you, Dr. Low, for your comment. I'll take your comment on board and work with all the relevant government departments to follow up on your suggestions. And may I respond to the wastewater in domestic waste? We are promoting recycling of food waste in a progressive manner so that the business sector could also pay more attention to that. As they collect food waste, the business sector would also try to separate the wastewater from the waste, and I hope more can be done in this regard. Thank you, Secretary. Next, Ms. Sit Ho, followed by Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Ms. Ho, thank you, Chairman. I wanted to ask about the collection of waste by RCVs in Hong Kong East and Kowloon, and they're not encouraged to go to Cheung Kwan O, so they will be rerouted to Sha Tin. And apart from private waste collectors having contracts with the FEHD, and I heard from them that costs would escalate as a result of this measure. The other point is about the proposal to extend the 3 landfills and 1 incinerator. I don't know, Secretary, what you have in mind. Have you secured enough votes? Maybe ultimately, despite all the questions, the proposal would pass. Or perhaps you will put it to a vote and it will be vetoed sooner. Do you have an alternative plan in case your proposal doesn't carry? For all the measures like opening the Sha Tin transfer station for private waste collectors, reduction of fees, etc., is it sufficient to cope with the situation if the proposal, before the proposal is passed, since the sand landfill will reach its capacity in a few years? So what is the maximum capacity and how long can it last? Secretary. Second part of your question. On different occasions, we have mentioned that in relation to the 3 landfills, 1 incinerator proposal, it has come by through a long time of planning and discussion, and this is a necessary facility for the community. So I hope members could understand that we don't have any alternative. Well, please do not canvass votes here, Secretary. Please answer my questions first. Now, about this diversion of waste. Now, it has come by because of the capacity limit of different waste disposal facilities. As for the maximum facility, I'll defer to my colleague, Mr. Chen. The FEHD is working with its contractors on rerouting of RCVs, and then by the middle of 2016, all the diversion plan will be completed. So let's say in March, in April, when the commencement date will be, it will tie in with that. So will that lower the capacity? Because your 3 landfills, 1 incinerator proposal may not pass. This is already happening. Since the end of last year, some of the waste have been diverted from the Cheung Kwan O landfill. In 2013, we were talking about 470 trips transporting other forms of municipal solid waste. As for the first 2 quarters of 2014, we're talking about 409 trips. So, judging from the figures, as mentioned in Para 3, the FEHD has begun rerouting the collection service. And as for private waste collectors, they would only follow suit after the legislation has been passed. In fact, apart from waste collection, we are also diverting sewage sludge. We are hoping to divert about 300 tons a day sewage sludge from Cheung Kwan O to other landfills, and it's expected to commence in the beginning of next year. Mr. Uchiwai, I have 2 questions. Now, the RCVs will be retrofitted with tailgate covers and wastewater sump tanks to make it fully enclosed. But there are also other vehicles not termed RCVs, but for the purpose of transporting refuse. And many criticize these vehicles for not fastening the canvas cover properly to prevent leakage. So what measures do you have to tackle these vehicles, not RCVs, but transporting refuse? And the other question is, are these vehicles against the law, and what exactly is the law? And the second question is about April 2015, and that the diversion would formally commence in April 2015 in relation to the Shatin transfer station. So according to your assessment, after its commencement, how many RCVs would continue to go to Cheung Kwan O landfill? Now, apart from the compressor type RCVs, there are also other refuse carrying vehicles. But we must bear in mind that these compressor type vehicles are responsible for 70% of the MSWs, and there are also other kinds of waste like construction waste, mud, and waste that doesn't require compression, and other types of vehicles can be used. For example, for vehicles coming out from construction sites, if they're not properly covered, there is a dust emission control regulation under the Air Pollution Control Ordinance stipulating that for dust emitting from vehicles with its cover not properly fastened, the vehicle can be subject to prosecution. And on major roads leading to landfills like Sha Kau Kok Highway and Wanpo Road, the FHD and the police would carry out joint operation and joint prosecution, and vehicles are intercepted in these operations. Most of these vehicles are intercepted because of overweight and speeding. As for the cover not properly fastened or leakage of leachate, well, these incidents are rarer, but we will remind the enforcement departments to step up their effort. And what about your other question? Well, let me just follow up on this answer first. You talk about enforcement and you rely on the Air Pollution Control Ordinance. Can you tell us about the progress of enforcement? And the other question is about the roads leading to landfills. Have you considered installing CCTVs to help you enforce the law? It's difficult to imagine you deploying staff to monitor the situation round the clock there. Thank you, Mr. Wu. The first question on dust emission. Yes, it is quite difficult for our colleagues to enforce the law. So we take a more proactive approach. Instead of waiting for something to happen before prosecution is initiated, we write to the sector beforehand, reminding them to pay particular attention to this point. As for joint enforcement operation, I can share with you some statistics. For Wanpo Road in Cheung Kwan O, we have intercepted around 600 vehicles, and among them, 70% committed overweight or speeding. Only about 90 vehicles committed the offense of dripping or improper cover, and that's the statistics starting from August last year to now. So as for your suggestion whether CCTVs can be installed along the road, another member raised this suggestion before, but as I gather, the district councils may not fully understand, and we also need to discuss with the transport department and other relevant departments as to whether we can easily install CCTVs for monitoring purpose. But at the unloading point or fly tipping point, we do install CCTVs. So there are problems. Out of 600, some 200 vehicles are problematic. So please follow up on the situation. Next, Deputy Chairman, Dr. Chen. Now, I think this is a policy paper. We can talk about the detailed amendments later. And let's talk about the policy. Some domestic waste has low recycling value, so there is little incentive for such waste to be recycled. and it poses great pressure on landfills. I'm talking about wood, and with your help in Eco Park, there is one enterprise that recycle waste. Recycle waste and make them turn them into doors for export to other countries. And you talked about consultation and communication with stakeholders. So how can we encourage timber and wood used at exhibitions, construction sites, for them to be recycled? Because depending on seasons, sometimes you see trucks of timber and wood being discarded in West Kowloon, and I wonder if this is an opportunity to communicate with stakeholders to help Hong Kong. Since we don't have any legislation on the disposal of timber, we can perhaps communicate and reduce the pressure of timber disposal at landfills.
Dr. Chen, thank you, Dr. Chen, in particular for cardboards. Well, we know where it's produced, for example, from the river trade terminal and also at the airport and so on. And there are also logistics companies which would help the manufacturers to transport the pallets to the different locations, and we have also written to the logistics companies asking them to directly approach the timber collectors at Eco Park, because that contractor is engaged in that sort of trade. That's why we would be talking to the river trade terminals about this. So other than pallets, there might be companies producing large quantity of timber for different purposes. We can also talk to them. Yes, I think this issue might have been taken up by different members on previous occasions, but then I'm sure both the Bureau and the departments might have made attempts by writing letters and so on to advise them to do certain things. All right, in the past there wasn't any law, and therefore you could not force them to do anything, and it's hard to force you to provide us with figures. I hope that you can go along that way, because after all we are talking about several dozen tons of timber, and the more we can do the better, and that would also ease the pressure on the landfills. And therefore we need to adopt a multi-pronged approach. So I suggest that the Bureau and the Bureau Director will continue to work hard, and I'll also play my part. For example, I've also provided information about the collectors. I've been told that the recycling load has been dropping during the past year or so. So, Bureau Director, what if people simply do not pay attention to what you wrote? So would you be doing a bit more in order to help the trade? Because why are you only asking us for funding for the 3 landfills and the incinerator? Why are you not working in another direction? Mr. Wong Ting Kwang. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask the Bureau Director this. Alright, the FEHD has now rerouted its collection service. So what's the situation like? I'm concerned about the traffic implication, because for the northwest NT landfill, what's the impact? So what's the traffic impact? Can you tell us more about that? Sorry, speaker's not coming through. Well, basically, on the adjustment to the fee and also the rerouting of the service, the purpose is to make the best use of the RTS, because after the compacting of the refuse, then the vehicles will be rerouted. Well, the FEHD in doing the rerouting is a rather complicated task, and they've already started the work. And starting from late last year, well, for landfills, for refuse going to the Cheung Kwan O landfill has been diverted to STTS and other RTS, and then as STTS has to be opened up for private collectors. Well, they are also opening up a typo, and about 100 tons of waste that used to go to typo, they will have to go a bit farther to the NT. So this is a progressive way of doing it, and the FEHD is also looking at the normal operation, and it has adopted a good practice, and that's why the impact is insignificant. But then, have you noticed that during the peak hours and non-peak hours traffic, have you controlled the number of trips? So have you adopted a tidal flow so as to ensure that you would not be putting too much pressure on the traffic? Well, at the RTS, well, we also have peak hours and non-peak hours. Well, usually the peak hours would be in the morning all the way up to about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the FEHD itself and also its contractors would be coming in during the peak hours because they would be collecting waste during the morning hours. But then for the private collectors, they would do so at different hours. So given this pattern, in fact, the pressure on the traffic can be eased with the rerouting. So we try not to schedule all the trips at the same time. Alright, if there are no further questions, then Bureau Director, would you like to summarize? No, there is no need. And I have not heard any members opposing to the 2 commencement notices. And then the 2 regulations will be gazetted on the 19th of December 2014 for the tabling of the legislation before this council on the 14th of December. Okay, so it's going to be done by way of negative vetting. Okay, so much for that. Next item, emission control for non-road mobile machinery, NRMMS. Again, this is a legislative proposal to control the air pollutant emissions of NRMMS. So once again, I'd like to invite the administration to brief us before the floor is open to members. Mr. Michael Tian. So originally, the 5th item should be discussed from 3 to 3:40 because I came here from another meeting. I intended to discuss that item. Sorry, we only have a limited number of members asking questions, and if we finish early, then we will have to move on to the other item. And if you need to express your views on this item, you can write in, and then we can pass it on to the Bureau Director. So have they changed their team already? Yes, because I've already declared that the discussion has completed. Well, I didn't know that you were wrapping up because I raised my hand as soon as I came in. Before I wrap up the discussion, I asked if any members would like to speak, and there was no indication from members suggesting that they'd like to speak. And after I've already concluded the discussion according to the agenda, I have to move on to item 6. And if you really like to speak, let me finish. Well, I suggest that you should resort to what I suggested. That is, you should write in, and then the Bureau will give you a reply. Chairman, can I be allowed to speak? Well, I was chairing the Railway Subcommittee. I was the chairman, and just now I was elected. There's no way that I could shuttle between the 2 meetings. And after the election, I came here directly, and then as soon as I entered the room, I raised my hand. I didn't know where you were at. I thought you were still discussing the item, and when you asked if anybody was against the legislation or whatever, I was already here. It's just that I'd like to ask some questions asking if the Bureau Director could promise to follow up on this. So can you exercise your discretion by allowing me to speak? Well, Mr. Tian, I'm also a member of the Railway Subcommittee. While I was chairing this meeting, I also went to the other room to participate in the election of Chairman and Deputy Chairman of the Railway Subcommittee. So I will exercise my discretion, allowing you to ask a follow-up question before we move on to our discussion on item 6. I'll be very brief, Chairman. The reason why I have to raise this here, well, at the Tuen Mun landfill, in fact, I conducted several site visits, and I noticed that when they came in to dispose of the waste after the compaction and also the grid-like waste, well, even for food waste after the compaction, well, the odor would be about 1/10 of the original odor without the compacting, and if it's construction waste and if you have food waste included, it's really very obnoxious. So most of the residents are against it. They are not really against those that is odorless. They are actually against waste that is that's smelly, and those in particular with a high water content would be particularly problematic. So for landfills, when you dispose waste there, it's free, but then if you go to the RTS, you will be charged. That's why I've thought about this. Should we change our mindset? And let's say if we have 1,000 commercial waste for domestic waste, sometimes it's difficult to separate food waste from the rest. And then if you're talking about 1,000 tons of commercial waste, definitely it's smelly. So can you consider doing this? All right, for the 1,000 tons of commercial waste, and if they have to go to the RTS, there should be no charge at all. And then for waste going into the landfills, you might be charging a very exorbitant price. That would definitely help to divert the most smelly waste to the RTS for compaction. And if you are able to do this, then you will at least be able to reduce the smelly waste by 1,000 tons so that it will no longer go to the 3 landfills. Because what I'm most concerned about is about the Cheung Kwan O landfill. Once it does not accept smelly waste anymore, then all the waste will go to the other landfills, and the residents there will be complaining very seriously. So if you're just looking at the 1,000 tons of commercial waste, would that be feasible? Bureau Director. Well, I'll be brief in my reply. It's not just an administrative measure, because for the charging policy at landfills, you have to have a legal basis for that. In fact, there are several measures underway. First, on MSW, the overall charging mechanism is now under preparation. Second, well, for food waste that has been sorted, we are now establishing this mechanism, including the organic waste treatment center. And also, for the RTS, which is being retrofitted, we are actually improving its handling capacity. So there would also be more room for us to consider your suggestion. We have taken on board your suggestion. Where there is a room for us to maneuver, we will be prepared to consider your suggestion. All right. Can we now move back on to item 6, emission control for non-road mobile machinery? With us today, again, include the Secretary for the Environment, Mr. Wong Kam Sing, and Mr. Andrew Lai, Deputy Director of Environmental Protection, Mr. Mok Wai Chun, Assistant Director, and Mr. Dave Ho, also from the EPD. Bureau Director, this is a paper to propose the making of a subsidiary legislation to regulate or control the air pollutant emissions of NRMMS, and there are several main points here. First, for new NRMMS, we propose that for those that will be put up for sale, lease, or supply, they will have to comply with prescribed emission standards as promulgated under the regulation, and they should also be properly labeled, and they will have to meet the European Union Stage 3A emission standards, and then the standards that they will have to meet will have to be the same as the one that is Euro 5, applicable to vehicles for first registration. And then for the mobile machinery, it has to be approved by the EPD, and they will also have to be properly labeled. And then for those that are presently being used or they are in use, they can be exempted from the new requirements. We will give them a grace period of 6 months so that their owners can apply for exemption, and then they will also have to put on labels in order for easy reference.
The third point is that for areas in the specified activities such as the airport, port facilities, construction sites, etc., when the NRMMs are used, proper labels should be affixed showing approval or exemption from the EPD before such NRMMs can be used. We consulted the sector, and the sector in general support this control, proposed control. And we also consulted the ACE and the panel on environmental affairs in the Legislative Council, and we sought support from both. And after preparing the after completing the drafting, we will be tabling it at the LegCo for negative vetting in early 2015, and subject to the approval, the regulation is expected to take effect on the 1st of April 2015. We have ample time, so I think we can allow 5 minutes each. Deputy Chairman, Dr. Kenneth Chen. Thank you, Chairman. As Secretary mentioned when he briefed us on the paper, in the beginning of 2012, we discussed this issue on how the NRMMs can be regulated, as they mainly operate at the airport or construction sites. What we're concerned is air quality and the health of workers working there. And at that time, the administration told us how many machines there are and their approximate lifespan, etc. So maybe the administration can supplement this information later. What will be the actual impact? I believe you do have some statistics at hand. Their lifespan, what kind of machinery, what air pollution they cause in general. Because according to the Clean Air Plan, we should head in this direction, and we have also the new AQOs, and the Civic Party would support this. However, when the administration said that having consulted the sector, exemption would be given, we would reasonably ask why exemption would be given. Is it because these machinery to be exempted will be phased out in the near future, so in order to save everyone's trouble, they will be exempted, and that new machinery will be subject to the new regulation? Or is it because, according to your statistics, the machinery will continue to pollute the environment, affecting the health of workers and the neighborhood as they have a long service period? If the reason is the latter one, then we need to ask, what about the impact on workers in working there and the people living there? And we may need to draw reference from the phasing out of diesel vehicles and ask what incentives can be given so that the machinery can be replaced as soon as possible to meet public's expectation, so that air pollution levels can be lowered and the measure can be more effective. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Chan, for your question. Now let's talk about the NRMMs, the types and distribution. According to our statistics, there are 14 to 15,000 NRMMs in Hong Kong, and these machines can be found usually in 3 places: construction sites, airport, and container terminals. And 80% of them, in fact, are in construction sites. and the remaining ones are mostly found in airports and the container terminals. And according to the information we got from the sector, for the existing NRMMs, the emission standard is still quite low, Euro Stage 1 level. So if you look at our new proposed regulation, it will be set at Euro Stage 3A level. And the emission can be 60% lower than the existing level. And we believe that this new regulation will help improve air quality and also to protect the occupational safety and health of workers at, say, container terminals. As for the arrangements under the new proposal for new NRMMs imported for sale and for lease and supply, they are required to follow the new emission standards, and that is Euro Stage 3A level. As for existing NRMMs, we give a grace period of 6 months, and the owners should register with us for exemption. So we take a snapshot and we just draw a line so that no new NRMMs not complying with the latest standards could be imported. And the member was concerned about the exemption arrangement because but now for the existing NRMMs, they come with various types and different levels, and the service periods may usually be more than a decade. And for existing NRMMs, we're talking about some 8 to 10 years to run. So in the next few years, these machines, if replaced, could be controlled by our new emission standards. On the other hand, although we have exemption arrangement for existing NRMMs, as far as the Development Bureau is concerned, they strongly support environmental initiatives. So after this legislation is passed, in the future, for the 4 major machinery used in public works, they will, in a progressive manner, require contractors to use machinery that comply with the latest emission standards. This can help promote the use of compliant machinery among the sector. Well, since I still have time, I have a follow-up suggestion. I personally am concerned about this. Even if you take a snapshot, the machinery can still run for some time, maybe after some maintenance and repair works, and the Euro Stage 1 level machinery can still circulate among, say, airport, construction sites, container terminals. Since we do not mandate the phasing out of such machinery, they can continue to run, and we can do nothing about it. As for how we can encourage contractors to upgrade the standards in public works contracts, yes, you have talked about it, but do we have any idea how we can really turn these 14 or 15,000 pieces of machinery from Euro Stage 1 to Euro Stage 3A level with lower emission standard, a cut of 60%? We are still some time away from the legislative stage, so please put in more effort to give us more concrete figures to convince us, to convince the public and workers that the administration is really working hard to achieving it. So, Secretary, Deputy Director, you heard the comment. Next, Mr. Frankie Yik. Thank you, Chairman. According to the administration's information, in relation to nitrogen oxides and RSPs, NRMMs accounted for about 6 to 8% of local emissions. Now, just now, Undersecretary, Deputy Director, you mentioned that with the new standard, the emission can be cut by 60%. So it's just about 3 to 4% and 3.2%. 2.4 to 3.2%, and the emission standards are lower. As for the new Euro Stage 3A level, I have a question. Do you have a clear idea that the existing NRMMs already in compliance with the Euro Stage 3A level? Are they available in the market? Otherwise, the existing operators would face huge pressure as they may not be able to procure such machinery, or they will lose out because of that. So my question is, do you know if there are existing NRMMs in the market that are in compliance with the Stage 3A level? And for the exemption arrangement, you say a snapshot will be taken and exemption to be given, and yet you impose another condition. You say that conditions may be imposed. I don't know what conditions you're referring to. If you already have something in mind, please communicate with the sector as soon as possible. Tell them that under such certain circumstances, conditions may be imposed, and this is just to reassure the operators so that they get prepared. The third question is this. It's easy for the airport and container terminals because the circumstances are easier. But as you said, 80% of the NRMMs are at construction sites, and many of these pieces of machinery are hired by contractors, and these are mostly SMEs. Can you guarantee, or at least do you have any ways to ensure that they receive the relevant information and apply for exemption in time? The fourth point is, as mentioned by Deputy Chairman, I'd like you to consider imposing a period like that for diesel vehicles, that it should be phased out in 15 years or so. If you're talking about machinery frequently used, then it's reasonable to look at the service period or lifespan. But if you're talking about machinery for hire, then it may be left idle for 7 months and then for use for only 3 months. And it may not be reasonable to impose a phasing out period. I'd like to seek your views on that. Deputy Director. Now on NRMMs, we have sought an understanding from the manufacturers of manufacturing countries like the United States or Japan. In the beginning of this year, they have already required the NRMMs manufactured to comply with the Euro Stage 4 level. And as we understand, adopting Stage 4 level as a starting point would commence the end of this year. So the prevailing machinery in the market is still Stage 3A, but in future there will be more products complying with Stage 4, so the sector should be able to procure such machinery. As for other additional conditions for exemption, I think this is fair. The simple way is that for giving exemption to existing NRMMs, there won't be any conditions. There will be conditions for, say, very specific pieces of machinery that can be manufactured by only 1 or 2 manufacturers around the world. And if this equipment is yet to comply with the 3A level, then either we don't import the machinery or we give certain work permit or license for its importation for a period of time, and only on those circumstances would we impose additional conditions. Now, thirdly, yes, 80% of the NRMMs are at construction sites, so we will be discussing with the CIC and other trade associations of the construction industry. And several months ago, we held a briefing and informed them of the latest situation and explained to them about the enforcement procedure in the future, and if the subsidiary legislation is passed, we will definitely inform all the relevant organizations or companies as to whether there is a service lifespan for the machinery. We agree very much with Mr. Yik For diesel vehicles, it's easier because we're talking about vehicles and the vehicle's lifespan may be 15 or 18 years, and it's easier to reach a consensus. As for MRMMs, since they come with various types, forms, and the frequency of use may also be different. If we adopt a single yardstick for the 14,000 NRMMs of various types, there may be strong objections from the sector. So to expedite the commencement of this legislation as soon as possible, we have to strike a balance. Mr. Tam Yu-chung. Well, we in general support the administration's proposed measures. However, the improvement is limited, just 2-point-something%. So, limited improvement, but it's better than nothing. But on implementation, because 80% of the NRMMs are found in construction sites, and by then the grace period will be over.
So how are you able to distinguish NRMMs which have been exempted? Would there be labels to be put on the machinery? And how are you able to tell if the label is a genuine one or a fake one? So with the regulatory regime in place, we hope that we can really do something concrete. And also for transport vehicles, can there be some form of compensation? But then will the amount be very substantial, and if the effect is not very significant, then it might not be a proper use of public money. So I'd just like to ask. Yes, Mr. Lai. Thank you, Mr. Tam, for your questions. Well, with regard to law enforcement, we take that very seriously. That's why after the plan is implemented, we will introduce a labeling system so that for frontline colleagues of the EPD, they would know when they have to do law enforcement. And also for NRMMs, there will be two types of labels. Well, for the newly imported NRMMs for use, for sale, or for lease, they will have to meet the latest standards. They will have to prove that the emission standard is equivalent to or is in excess of the European Union Stage 3A, and then upon approval, we'll give them a label to be put on the NRMMs. And then for some existing machinery, the owners can also apply for an exemption label, and whether it's an approval label or an exemption label, they will have to be stuck to the machinery, whether it's a crane or a crane lift or just the machinery. They will have to put that on as a label, setting out the type or model of the machinery, and also the trademark, and also the serial number of the machinery, and also the exemption number or the approval number by the EPD. So when the EPD staff go to the container terminal or the construction site, well, they are now responsible for enforcing noise control and air pollution control. So in the future, when they visit these construction sites, they will have to go around to check if all the equipment has got this label, and whether or not the label is genuine, and if there are any breaches, then they will have to be punished in accordance with the established mechanism. Just now, the member also has an observation in terms of the reduction in terms of emission. Indeed, these NRMMs are not the main source of pollution in Hong Kong, but then as we have dealt with many major sources of emission like vehicles, power generating plants, and vessels and so on, we hope that we would also extend that to NRMMs, because that would help in reducing air pollution for workers working at the construction site so that their occupational safety can be enhanced. And also, as I just explained, as the machinery's use and the way it's used is very varied, and the lifespan for individual machinery would also be very different. And if we were to introduce this compensation or ex gratia mechanism, as Mr. Tim said, it's not like the $11.4 billion for the replacement of diesel vehicles. I think that would have a direct impact on people's life, and given the cost, we would also have to consider that very carefully. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong. Thank you, Chairman. A couple of days ago, when we discussed with the Environment Bureau, I raised a number of issues. I'd like to see if there is any response to the points that I made a couple of days ago on the licensing mechanism. For vehicles to be licensed, you would look at the serial number and engine number. So you'll be looking at the serial number on the vehicle and also the engine number. So for these machineries, they would also have similar problems. So would you be looking at the serial number of the machinery and also the engine number of the machinery before you issue permits? If that is the case, then I have this concern, because there is a story of substituting one machinery for another. Alright, you can have a machinery and you erase the engine number, and then you can just cook up a number, and then you can change it altogether so that for the machinery is no longer in use, but still by replacing the label you would now be able to use it again. So it's like a resurrection of the machinery. And also for vehicles applying for a mainland license, well, what they are able to do is that you can ask someone, well, when the they will have to be scanned so that the engine number will have to be registered, and they would also have to match the engine number with the list printed out by the authorities. So you don't just look at the engine number, you will also have to make sure that the fingerprint of that number matches with what is on their list. So have you considered that? Second, well, for such machineries, they are not subject to a lot of wear and tear. So once you buy one, it can be used for 20-30 years. But then if you look at these machineries, even internationally, there are multinationals leasing such machineries. So we do have this requirement that for newly imported machinery, they will have to meet the latest requirements, and then for the old ones, they can be exempted. What about engines or machineries that are on lease? Let's say if I hire if I hire an engine into Hong Kong, then do I have to meet the requirements? Well, for the engine number, indeed, the engine number would determine the status of the machinery, and therefore if the applicant approaches us where there is an import of a new machinery into Hong Kong, or if they just apply for an exemption altogether, we will ask them to produce the serial number for the machinery, because that's the status or the identity of the machinery, and also to ensure that there is no fabrication whatsoever. They would not be using a different machinery in the place of this one. So we will have to get a picture of that so that we'll be able to track that down. Instead of people telling us that they own a machinery here, we will have to make sure that all the documentation is with us. And also for overseas machinery, they would, well, if they are newly imported into Hong Kong, they will have to meet the prevailing standards. But then just now it's been mentioned that if it involves very specialized equipment, then in granting exemption, well, as this is specialized equipment, and they may not be able to meet the latest standards, for example, for boring machines and so on, well, they will still be allowed to be imported into Hong Kong, even though they may not be able to meet the emission standards. All right, I'm talking about engine power or horsepower of over 500, 600, and so on. So for the large boring machine that was used earlier on in the MTR system, well, I'm not talking about that. All right, if I'm just importing a ventilation machine, all right, that's very common. Or if I just hire a machine to tear down a building, then what happens? Well, in overseas countries, that might have been in use for some time, and it has exceeded the exemption period. So if they try to import it into Hong Kong, do they have to meet the standards? Well, if they claim that it's a certain type of machine that has to be used in Hong Kong, under the circumstances, they will have to meet the emission standards in Hong Kong. But then for a ventilation machine, well, they may be able to get one in Hong Kong, and now we are talking about a European Union Stage 3A standard. Even if they want to import one, it should not be too difficult. For example, generally speaking, we are talking about Europe, and in the US, they are already reaching Euro 4 standards, and therefore there should be no difficulty importing one that is able to meet the standards. So if it's just a very common machine, that should not be difficult. So they should be able to import one or identify one in Hong Kong. All right, we're finished with the first round. I'd like to make use of my round to ask a few follow-up questions. Just now, when you answer members' questions, you said that there are some exempted machineries, and basically they are partly new or partly old, and there is still some time to go before they reach the end of their serviceable life. So will that affect the effectiveness of emission reduction? And just now, the Deputy Chairman also said that can it be done in the form of the vehicle replacement scheme, so that some funds can be used to encourage them to replace them. So have you considered the implications for the exempted machinery? How are you able to ensure that they can be replaced as soon as possible instead of remaining in the streets of Hong Kong for an excessively long period of time? And second, I'm concerned that even for the new machines, well, while they will be licensed, but then do you have a spot check system? Because once they got the labels, well, for most of the machinery that is being used at construction sites, the wear and tear could be rather rapid. And if it's not properly maintained and repaired, then even if they get a license, in terms of the emission quantity without proper repair and maintenance, it could be rather serious. So will you be conducting spot checks? Or is it that after getting the label, it's almost like an exemption forever, so that there is no need for them to carry out proper repair and maintenance, and as a result, they would be emitting more instead of less? So there are 2 points here. Well, on the exemption arrangement, we also have to look at overseas practice. If you look at the US or Japan or mainland or even EU, with regard to NRMMs, in terms of the regulation, they would be doing what we are proposing to do. That is, they would be regulating the import, sale, and lease, but then at the same time, they would also be regulating the manufacturing of such machinery. So for machinery that is in use, in fact, if you look at their practice, they would also not be introducing specific legislation to regulate the use of it. So it's not that we are departing from international practice. Well, for the machinery in use, and if you try to regulate how they are repair and maintain, there might be some difficulties. But then does that mean that for machinery in use, there is no room for improvement at all? But then, as I said, looking at the problem itself, we are talking about 14,000, 15,000 NRMMs, and 80% of them is being used at construction sites. So that's the biggest concern on our part, because for the airport and also the container terminal, with regard to mechanic or electric appliances, they are trying to automate them. For example, for the lift cranes being used at the container terminal, most of them are already electric machines. But then, for those used at construction sites, for government construction sites, we have already provided incentives. For example, under government contracts, we have taken up about half of these projects, and we have also talked to the EMSD. They said that once the law is passed, for 4 types of NRMMs used at construction sites, for example, power generators, lift cranes, and so on, they would be adopting a progressive approach, so that within 5 years, for any contractor taking up government projects, they will have to use 100% of the 4 types of machinery recommended by us. And under these circumstances, there is reason for us to believe that for the construction sector, in order to tie in with government requirements on its construction sites, when they replace their machinery or when they use high emission performing machinery, there is an incentive for them to change for the better ones.
Right, one more, Dr. Kenneth Lau.
5分鐘啊，主席。係啊，5分鐘得。我想問一問咧。
5 minutes. Now I have a question on the MRMMs. So far, they are not subject to stringent control. And just now you said that in the coming 5 years, the existing machinery will have to be phased out and the new emission standards will have to be complied with. I want to know whether this is already the latest standard, and because in 5 years' time we may be lagging behind the latest standards then. Now, the NRMMs emit air polluting substance because they use diesel, so can you require the diesel running machinery? I mean, in construction sites where diesel-operated NRMMs are used, can you require them to convert or use biodiesel fuel instead? I don't know whether this is possible. The third question is this. If you cannot immediately enforce the regulation, will you discuss with the FSTB and see if tax breaks can be offered? Say for owners procuring NRMMs complying with the latest standards, they will be eligible to a full tax break. Deputy Director, Dr. Leung's third question is whether tax incentives can be provided. This is a very innovative idea. We haven't come up with this idea before, but if we are to offer tax concessions within the government, we need to discuss with the FSTB colleagues, and it may take some time before we can deal with it. But I will take your suggestion back and consider it. The other question is on the latest emission standard being Euro Stage 3A level. That is the standard we set. It is already quite advanced. In Europe, in the United States and Japan, they will start requiring manufacturers to manufacture machinery complying with the Stage 4 level. Same as importation. For mainland, it's next year, and for Singapore, they're using Euro Stage 2. So for the proposed Stage 3A, it's a more stringent emission standard on the one hand. On the other hand, in terms of affordability and procurement of machinery by the sector, we have taken these into account in our consideration. And on a Euro 3 A's level, it's not just the end of the matter. This is just the starting point as we enact a piece of legislation. And we will keep up with the times. If in 2 or 3 years' time, when we conduct a review, we find that there are more stringent emission standards used across the world, there is still room for us to revise the level, or perhaps to raise the level from Euro 3 to Euro 4. And Dr. Leung also mentioned whether existing NRMMs can use biodiesel fuels instead. I'll defer to my colleague. Now, on the NRMMs, we are very concerned about that emission. There is no standard for them to comply with so far. In fact, they are already using low sulfur diesel fuel which would help reduce substantially sulfur dioxide emission and the emission of particles. As for retrofitting existing NRMMs with devices to reduce emission, it's quite difficult for existing NRMMs, especially highly efficient particulate filters. Very often, these devices are not compatible with the operation of the NRMMs. So the suggestion of retrofitting the NRMMs with devices such as these would be difficult. But as I said, they have already used low sulfur content diesel, which have substantially reduced sulfur emission level. Dr. Low, I quote, "I'm sorry I have been dashing between rooms for meetings, so I'm sorry if I've missed out anything." Well, just now Mr. Andrew Lai, Deputy Director, mentioned the reality for the NRMMs at present using diesel, generating emission. Quite a large portion of them are used in government construction projects. So I agree strongly that on the one hand, in terms of legislation, we need to step up control. On the other hand, we should also improve management continuously. In terms of enterprises and the operation of construction sites, we can follow some ISO standards, ISO 14000, in relation to environmental management. And I need to declare my interest. I'm chairman of the Hong Kong Certification and Accreditation Council. I am working on a voluntary basis, but I make this declaration. The government should work with the sector to raise the management standard. So, Mr. Lai, can you tell us more? Whether the administration has any concrete plans? If not, how will you utilize the platform to communicate with the sector and promote this? Deputy Director. Thank you, Dr. Low, for your comment. 2 points. First, if this regulation is endorsed by the Council, when it comes into effect, we'll definitely discuss with the CIC and also relevant bodies in the construction industry. We will let them know very clearly our requirements so that the relevant companies and contractors can comply with our requirements. Dr. Low also mentioned another important point. For the newly imported NRMMs in future, the emission standards must be at least Euro Stage 3A level. So on the accreditation matters, we can work with the relevant organizations, say for the importers or the hirers, should they want to apply for accreditation, they can approach the relevant accreditation bodies. Any follow-up, Dr. Low? Apart from accrediting machines, I mentioned ISO 14000, that is about environmental management accreditation. So apart from the equipment itself, management is also important. Even if the machine complies with the standard, if the maintenance and operation matters are done poorly, in the end, you may not comply with the emission standards. The two goes in parallel. In fact, Dr. Low's suggestion is very good. There are also companies offering such machinery for hire. They come and we can discuss with them As you mentioned, apart from the machinery itself meeting the standard, they should properly maintain their machinery, and we can discuss with them whether they could do more in this regard. And even if they do not have the means to apply for ISO certification, they can at least properly maintain and repair the machinery. It helps make the machinery more reliable, so we can do more. Second round. 2 colleagues, 3 minutes each. Mr. Frankie Yick. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, you raised a point just now. It's quite good. Dr. Low talked about environmental management. It's about the system, but it doesn't help resolve the question on whether maintenance is sufficient or not. If it were a vehicle, you can arrange for the vehicle to go to a center for checking, but not in a case. Well, that's in the case of bulldozers, but not for other machinery. So my question is about other jurisdictions. How do they do it? I don't see any measures that can help resolve this problem. Mr. Mok. We are also concerned about emissions from NRMMs. On construction machinery or NRMMs, there are various types. So how can the emission of such machinery be tested? So it's it's easy for a vehicle to go on a treadmill, but not for such large NRMMs. In California, in the United States, they have been very proactive in the relevant research, and they're quite advanced, and so far they have not come up with ways to check if the machine has been properly maintained and repaired. But we'll closely monitor the situation in advanced economies like the United States and in Europe and see whether we can follow suit in Hong Kong. Deputy Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. In the first round, when some members spoke, I came up with some follow-up questions. I'd like the administration to note that because, for example, Mr. Yick talked about the frequency of use of different types of machinery and their lifespan will be different. Well, that's an objective fact. But in the beginning of this year, when the administration attended our panel meeting, they gave us some statistics that in general their service life is about 15 to 20 years. As to how this figure has come by, we can discuss it later when we talk about the details. But we should not mislead the public into thinking that because there is a difference in the service life of different machinery, we don't need to consider the idea of phasing out the machinery. For example, how to phase out those Euro 1 machines. We should discuss that. I don't want a contrary message to be sent out.
Well,
I hope all would understand that I'm not suggesting that there should be no phasing out of these outdated machinery. Well, please do give us some figures, be it about 14,000 or below 14,000. We have been deploying much resources to train workers and encouraging new blood in the industry, some $400 or $500 million starting from 2010. So just now Mr. Tam Yu Chong said that well, despite all the effort and the resources, it's only been a reduction of some 2% or so. I want the administration to reaffirm that we are doing it in order to protect public health. Now air quality has improved because of the phasing out of diesel vehicles. We also need to look after the health of workers who work around these machines for over 10 hours a day. So we should put things into context, not instead of talking about a reduction from 6% to 2%. It's not just about putting in resources to improve the air quality of the work environment. My comment. Any response? No? Who else would like to speak on this topic? No? I believe members have fully expressed their comments and concerns on this topic. Would the administration please note members' comments and suggestions and make the appropriate response as you draft your legislation and make adjustments. Item 7, any other business? Nothing under AOB, so meeting's adjourned. Thank you.